Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome the Vice President of the United States, Mr. Joe Biden.
Great to be here.
I'm very glad to see you again. We've met sometimes before, but mostly in Washington. We almost met in Serbia the other week, but we didn't do that. But in Washington, recently in May, at the U.S. Nordic Summit, when we were invited by President Obama, and also more than a year ago, we had a quite long talk at the time. You were very generous with your time, so it's an honor to have you here in Stockholm, Mr. Biden. We have completed substantial talks on bilateral issues, but also on global challenges, and the talks, the discussion we have had reminds me once again how excellent the U.S. and Swedish relations are, and I think I can say that they are perhaps stronger than ever, and we are very glad for that. We will continue to deepen our close cooperation. Our two countries share many common interests, as well as the ambition to show leadership on global challenges. We have especially talked about the global refugee crisis and how to create sustainable conditions for peace and security around the world. On September the 20th, I will participate in the Leaders' Summit on Refugees in New York, hosted by President Obama, with Sweden as co-host, and that summit aims to strengthen refugee protection around the world. In order to do that, more countries must contribute and assistance must increase. We need shared responsibility in the European Union, of course, but also shared responsibility globally, because no country, no region, no continent, no organization can handle this alone. The global refugee crisis can only be solved with global solutions. We're also determined to work together for peace and security, not least now when Sweden is taking the non-permanent seat in the UN Security Council. We stand firm in our resolve to counter terrorism, to counter extremism, and to continue the work in the coalition against Daesh. I believe that the transatlantic link is more important than ever. It is definitely key in responding to challenges to European and global security. We have discussed energy security, in particular different concerns regarding the Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline, and we must ensure that the interests of the European Union, its neighboring states, are protected in legal, security, and political terms. I can also say that I'm delighted that you have assured that you will try to participate, you want to participate in the Global Deal initiative and that project. Global Deal is a vision, a concept for how to create win-win-win situation in a globalized world through governments, employers, trade unions, and others jointly addressing challenges in the global labor market. Because we know that decent work is not only the morally right thing to do, it also spurs productivity and growth. So that is a very important project for me personally, and I'm very glad that you want to participate. We know also that creating good conditions for trade, innovation, new industrialization is equally important, and for us, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP, is therefore vital. Can I finally just say that I'm personally also very pleased that we will increase our cooperation on cancer research, which is a very important area, of course, important sector in which the United States and Sweden are front runners, and we have every reason to keep on working together and exchange knowledge on that, in that area. Please, Mr. Vice President.
Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for your hospitality and for all of your colleagues, all the members of your cabinet administration are here. I appreciate the discussion we had this morning. And it's a real pleasure for not only an American, for a Delawarean to be here in Sweden because a few years ago I had the great pleasure to host King Carl Gustaf and Queen Sylvia in my home state of Delaware to celebrate the 375th anniversary of the first Swedish colony in the United States of America, in my home state. It is still an area of our state along what they call the Christina River. You'd not be surprised the name of the river. And where Old Swedes Church still resides, and we take great pride in that relationship. As a matter of fact, back in 1782, near the end of the American Revolution, a Swedish minister in Paris sought out Ben Franklin, one of our founding fathers, and he said he wanted to be remembered that, quote, Sweden was the first power in Europe which voluntarily, without solicitation, offered friendship to the United States. And that friendship is still as real and as appreciated as it was way back then. But we Delawareans claim particular kinship with Sweden. You know, this visit comes at the end of a short trip that I've made to the region to visit several of our allies, at first to the Baltic Summit of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, and then yesterday to Turkey. And Sweden is another very, very important part of in Europe where we get an awful lot done together. And the Prime Minister and I talked about how our nations share extremely strong bonds of kinship, and maybe even more importantly, values. The way we look at the world and our responsibilities around the world. There are more than 4 million Swedish Americans in the United States of America, and Sweden is a leader in the European Union, a staunch partner to the NATO alliance, and a close friend to the United States of America. And we are proud, we were proud to welcome you, Mr. Prime Minister, as part of the Nordic Summit in Washington in May, where we celebrated this integrated partnership between the Nordic nations and the United States. Today, we covered with your ministers and you a broad range of issues where our nations are working side by side to advance a shared vision of how we can be both value-added to the rest of the world, not just to one another, but to the rest of the world. First, we spoke about the commitment of strengthening our interest around the world. Our troops serve together in Afghanistan, where Sweden contributes to NATO Train, Advise, and Assist mission. And as members of the Counter-ISIL Coalition, Sweden's military is helping to train local forces in Iraq so they can bring the fight to ISIL on the ground, those that you are training. And we're united in our commitment to stamp out this evil, which is having a significant impact on a number of things, including immigration flows. And Sweden has shown great leadership. You have shown great leadership, Mr. Prime Minister, and great compassion in providing the critical humanitarian aid and assistance to millions of refugees fleeing violence in Syria and Iraq, and for that matter, Afghanistan. Last year alone, your government pledged $33 million in assistance to Iraq and $41 million in assistance for those purposes in Syria. And as we have an expression in the United States, a slang expression, Sweden punches way above its weight class, and it really does. And you accepted 163,000 immigrants to Sweden, giving them safe haven, more refugees per capita than any European nation. And we know that is not easy. But it's a reflection of the generosity and the commitment of your people. It is difficult, but it is admired. And one of the reasons for President Obama looking forward to you co-hosting the Leaders Summit on Refugees. Other nations have to step up. We have contributed a little over $5.1 billion thus far, but the rest of the world has to step up and take on responsibility for these displaced persons. And again, we're looking forward to you co-hosting that initiative next month at the General Assembly. And we hope that more countries are going to follow your example and take on the burden to protect and assist refugees in need. The second thing that we spent some time speaking about was how we strengthen energy security worldwide, but particularly how you do it here in Europe by diversifying energy sources and supplies, increasing connections across Europe, and strengthening the energy markets in Europe. That is a vital economic interest, it's a vital security interest, it's a vital environmental interest. And no country should be able to use energy as a weapon. No country should be able to use energy to coerce policies from other nations or actions. And speaking for ourselves, speaking for the United States, Nord Stream 2 pipeline, we think, is a fundamentally bad deal for Europe. My colleagues joke with me when I say I never tell another man or woman what's in their interest, but I can tell you from our perspective, it looks like a fairly bad deal. And I know you are going to examine it, as the rest of your colleagues in Europe as well. Europe needs diverse sources of gas, not, in our view, new Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And to lock in greater reliance on Russia at this moment, I think risks this. I know it will fundamentally destabilize Ukraine, where you have led in trying to respond to the aggression on the part of Russia and their reluctance to enforce Minsk II, to which they have agreed to thus far. And so, but again, that is a decision for you and your colleagues to make. But you know, Russian gas can and should be a part of the European market, but that market needs to be open and needs to be competitive. Everyone has to play by the rules. Everyone has to play by the rules. And the time to act is now, because this is a very transformational moment in global energy. This year, for the first ever, shipments of liquefied natural gas from the United States have arrived in Europe. And every country in Europe is now able to, if they choose, to buy natural gas from the United States. It is a judgment. They have the ability to diversify their sources. But it's for all of them to decide. But we have changed, we have altered, we have increased our access to American natural gas. And so we're eager to continue working with our partners to help Europe deal with what the EU decided some 8-10 years ago, an energy policy for Europe. And finally, we spoke about our cooperation to advance other shared values around the world, such as upholding human rights and women's rights. You have been a leader. You, your administration, Sweden has been a leader. You know, there's that expression that I often quote. It's from a Chinese proverb: women hold up half the world. And the failure to engage women in the social and political and economic enterprise of the country is a gigantic, gigantic opportunity lost beyond the human toll that it takes. It is, and your leadership and your cabinet's leadership is important in that area, as well as expanding tolerance and inclusion for all people, the LGBT community, all people in the world are entitled to be treated with dignity, period. Dignity. Everyone is entitled to be treated with dignity, and that's been the hallmark of your country. And also, you've worked very hard, and we've worked together to bolster the rule of law. And so, these are universal values. They belong to all people on earth. And I want to thank the people of Sweden for putting those values, Swedish values, squarely at the center of your foreign policy. That's why the president jokes and kids about how much he enjoys dealing with. If everything was easy as dealing with the Nordic states and the value system you represent, he jokes everything in the world would be better. But I think there's some truth to that. Sweden dedicates a full 1% of its budget $43 billion to development aid. This is an incredibly generous commitment, and the United States is proud to be your partner, leading and helping lead in transformative development efforts around the world, from Power Africa to others we could name. It will have long-term consequences on stability, on opportunity in other parts of the world. When our countries work together in these issues and the close coordination that we have, we enhance our individual effectiveness, and quite literally we can begin to change the world a piece at a time. And so, Mr. Prime Minister, there are a few issues on which Sweden and the United States are not in perfect sync. I'm sure there are some, but there are very few, very few. You know, we have a strong, as you said, and growing trade and investment relationship. We're partners in pursuing high standards and comprehensive trade agreements that will bring down trade barriers between Europe and the United States, supporting good jobs. And one of the things that intrigues me the most is your effort at the United Nations. The truth of the matter is that unless and until we find the ability of the global economic system to accommodate good-paying jobs and not have as many losers and winners as exist, having ordinary people seeing that they can, in fact, benefit from globalization, you're going to begin to see, if we don't deal with that, increased resistance around the world to trade and opportunity. You see some of it happening in my country right now. And so your leadership in this issue as a former trade unionist is really very important. And lastly, we talked a little bit about the cancer moonshot. The president asked me to honcho, as we say, take over in the United States. And one of the things that's pleased me the most is the number of countries that have indicated they'd be willing to enter into memorandum of understanding with us on how we collectively promote and expand and speed up the research that's available for cures and turning some cancers into chronic diseases. It requires the world to participate. And so at the United Nations, I'll be meeting with a number of other countries that want to do that with us, and we're working now, your government and ours, on the possibility of a similar memorandum of understanding. And lastly, working together to address climate change, to advancing scientific cooperation is another place where you've led. You have a significant portion of all of your energy needs being met by renewable resources. It is necessary that the world eventually wean itself off of carbon, and you're way ahead of the rest of the world, and the rest of the world can learn a lot from what you're doing. So we're looking forward to continuing to work with you on that scientific cooperation as well. So even though this visit was short, from our perspective at least, Mr. Prime Minister, it was a very important one. And I look forward to continuing my work with you, and the President does as well, Mr. Prime Minister, as we keep strengthening this partnership and find new ways to deliver for both our people, and together deliver to make things better beyond our individual countries in the region and the world. And it's always a great pleasure to be here, and thank you very, very much for your hospitality.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, welcome to Sweden.
Delighted to be here.
I know that regional security and energy security has been an important part of your discussion, and I'm sure you're aware that many Swedes are afraid of Russian aggression. Just this morning, Russia launched a drill not very far from here. So what is your current analysis of the security situation around the Baltic Sea? And Mr. Biden, what do you want to say towards Swedes, especially in light of the new defense agreement between our countries? And as a follow-up to that, if there is time, security is also linked to migration and refugees, as you both mentioned. And within a few weeks, this summit will take place. What are the top 3 things on your to-do list to deal with the global refugee crisis? And Mr. Biden, are there things the U.S. can learn from Sweden in this area?
What's the last question?
Are there things that the United States can learn from Sweden on the area of refugees and receiving refugees?
There's a lot, I'm not being solicitous. There's a lot the United States can learn and has learned from Sweden. As I said, we joke in the Situation Room about how Sweden and some others are just ahead of the curve in terms of understanding. There is a direct correlation between global stability and migration. There's a direct correlation between access to energy and stability. There's a direct correlation between global warming and war and peace. There's a direct correlation. These things are connected, and Sweden understands it. Sweden has acted in a way that reflects they understand that. It's not just, for example, make the move away from fossil fuels so we have cleaner air to breathe and we limit global warming. As I said earlier, when we first came to office, we asked our Defense Department to look at the greatest threats we face. The Defense Department says the greatest threat we face in the United States is global warming, because global warming causes wars. As people are displaced, as there's fights for arable land. You saw what happened in Darfur a decade ago. So Sweden, we learn a lot from the way Sweden looks at the world, and understanding all these issues are connected. They're connected. Now, with regard to your question about security in the Baltic region, we just came out of a conference, a NATO conference in Warsaw, but talk about how things have changed. We're having a NATO conference in Warsaw. I slipped and said Warsaw Pact. That's how long I've been around. But things have changed a great deal. And at that conference, at that meeting of all the NATO partners, and I understand, and I'm not suggesting that Sweden should be part of NATO or not. That's a decision for Sweden. But we did two things. We made a major forward commitment in the region of the Baltic Sea, in the Baltic states, from Poland north. And I realize Poland is not a Baltic state, but we're going to put in a mechanized division of close to 5,000 people in Poland, sitting in Poland. The Canadians are putting close to 5,000 people in Latvia. The Germans and the Brits are doing similarly in Estonia and in Lithuania. And so we're making it very clear that Article 5 of the NATO treaty is a sacred obligation the United States has made, and all the NATO partners have made. We do not believe that borders are able to be violated. We think the future lies in, and stability for not just us, but for Russia, for the whole subcontinent, lies in a Europe whole, free, and at peace. And so, at the same time, we are working in coordination with what Sweden is doing, unrelated to anything we're asking. Sweden is increasing its defense capabilities. Sweden is investing more in its ability to be able to negotiate physically and otherwise in the Baltic Sea. Sweden is stepping up to what it believes to be its national interest relative to any concern that may come from Russia. And we have agreed that there is a partnership between NATO and Sweden in terms of how we view what constitutes a Europe whole, free, and secure, and at peace. And so there should be no misunderstanding on the part of anyone, from Mr. Putin or anyone, that this is inviolate territory. Period. And so and we have made it clear, and at the same time, we have not in any way, the United States, lessened our commitments around the world. We spend more money on national defense than the next 8 nations in the world combined. Add them all up. We spend more than the next nation, not because we're a bellicose nation, but because the obligations are real. From the South China Sea to the Baltic Sea to the Pacific writ large. And the best way to maintain peace and stability is to make it clear there are certain basic rules of the road. And on those rules of the road, the good news for us is Sweden and the United States, Sweden and NATO are in agreement what those basic rules are. I don't want to misspeak for you, I demoted you. It's terrible to call a man vice president, but Mr. Prime Minister. But I hope I've accurately described the relationship, and I hope I've answered your question.
Sure. Okay. Well, first on the security issue in our neighborhood, we do not regard Russia as an immediate threat. But of course, we see what happens in Ukraine, what has happened, the illegal annexation of Crimea, and the unrest, the fighting in the Donbas area. We've seen some activities in closer to our region, so that is why we are increasing our own military capacity, and that is also why we are expanding with different cooperation agreements that we have with single countries, the most important, the deepest one with Finland, but also with other countries, and that is why we have this cooperation with NATO, EU, and others, because that is our way to handle that situation and to take responsibility for this region. And we will continue to do that, non-aligned, because we think that is the best way to handle it, but with that different kind of cooperations. And that is very clear. Regarding refugees, let me just say that I think the most important thing now is, and that is why I'm so happy that the United States is showing leadership now. The key issue now is to, what Vice President also said, more countries need to step up. When I was in Jordan 10 days ago and visited two camps, it's so clear that more countries need to do more. When these families, these people, when they flee, when they're actually running away from their own country because of security reasons, they are only thinking of how can we go back to our country as fast as possible. We haven't met our family, the other part of the family, for 4 years. I talked to one family who explicitly said this. And so we need to make sure that they have a decent life also when they go into Jordan or Lebanon or Turkey, so that we first can provide security, shelter, food, water, but also now what we're developing right now is the possibility to have a job, to continue the children's education, school, because we want the life to be as good as possible in this situation, but also to be able to help and to build the country once peace is established in your own country, and that is what we're doing now. But that's so clear now that more countries need to take that responsibility. As I said, this is not a single nation responsibility. One nation or two or three cannot handle this alone. Not one continent. We need to do it together, and that is why I'm so glad that we can participate in this summit next month in New York, so we get more countries to step up, take a shared global responsibility.
Thanks very much. Thank you. First, Mr. Vice President, a follow-up on Turkey from yesterday. Did the Turkish leaders give you any sense of how long they plan to stay in Syria? And would the U.S. support or oppose a buffer zone if they tried to create one? Also, just broadly, how did you feel the trip went? There are some media in Turkey who are calling it a failure because you weren't able to do more on, or say more on Gulen. And if I can squeeze in a domestic question as well. You have a few months left before you and the president leave office. Do you think that you'll succeed in getting Guantanamo Bay closed? My question for the Prime Minister is also on Turkey. Vice President Biden said yesterday that Turkey needed more time to adjust because the coup had just happened very recently. Do you share that view, or do you think that Turkey has gone too far in its crackdown on civil liberties? Thank you.
Yes, no, yes. if I have the order of your questions correctly. Do I think the visit was a success? The answer is yes, I do think it was a success, because I have not a single doubt in my mind that the Prime Minister and the President fully understand U.S. position on every issue that we discussed. I don't have any doubt that they understand that. And in that sense, I think it was a success in that, notwithstanding what, and by the way, the context for those of you who weren't there was that there is an overwhelming feeling on the part of Turkish citizens, not just leadership, that because Mr. Gulen is in the United States of America, and they believe, the citizenry of Turkey as well as leadership, that Gulen was the one behind the coup, and he is in the United States of America, that we have an immediate obligation to extradite him and send him back to Turkey. And it is difficult, as it always is, for any other nation to understand that we are a country where the rule of law prevails no matter what. And under our extradition treaties and under our court system and our division of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, an executive, i.e. a president, does not have the power to unilaterally extradite anyone. There has to be facts brought forward to a federal court laying out a prima facie case as to the assertion made by the country seeking the extradition of an individual. The Turks admitted that they had not done that yet as it related to the coup, and we have our experts from our Justice Department in Turkey. They were there the day before yesterday, sitting down with Turkish officials saying, let's look at what the treaty we signed requires. Give us the following information. We will take it to a federal court, and the judge will decide, because we are a country of rule of laws. If a president decided to try to bypass that, he would be subject to impeachment, not figuratively, literally be subject to impeachment. He has no authority. That's hard for another country to understand when there is so much certainty that an individual is responsibility for what had to be an absolutely, not only physically, but emotionally traumatic event. This coup, there was an attempt to kill the the president and his family. A helicopter gunship riddled his hotel with bullets 15 minutes after he left with his family and children and grandchildren. There was an attempt to take out the prime minister. They actually bombed, and you probably saw, they actually bombed out the parliament and the presidential, the president's office space. And you saw the enormous courage of the people of Turkey, not the leadership, the people. They went to the street. They had no idea whether another F-16 would come flying over and wipe them out. They had no idea as they turned around the block in a building, you'd see a helicopter rise with a gunship to take them out. But they went to the street. They literally went to the bridges and stood in front of tanks and got run over, some of them. So we should pay some tribute to the commitment of the people of Turkey to their democracy. They showed real grit. But are they upset that we just aren't sending this guy back? Yes. Could I solve that problem? I knew from the beginning there's no way to solve that problem other than through the legal means that are internationally agreed to by us and Turkey as to how to proceed. With regard to whether or not the Turkish people or the government of Turkey thinks we understand their trauma, I'm confident my visit demonstrated to them we understand, we appreciate, and we have great empathy for what happened to them. With regard to the last question, do we support the potential violation of civil liberties and civil rights in response? No, we do not. But what I said was, this is a trauma that happened 40 days ago. Let's give them a little time. Ask yourselves rhetorically, what would happen if that happened here in Sweden? What would happen if that happened in the United States of America? You've got to let cooler heads have an opportunity. No one has been tried thus far. No one has been executed or anything else. Bad things could happen. And if that occurs, we will speak up with the rest of the world to speak up, to say, abide by your Constitution. That's what I meant when I said, give them some time. Give them a little time. Imagine if it happened in your country. Imagine.
There were two other questions, sir.
What were the other two?
How long the Turks will stay in Syria in a buffer zone, and then there was one comment.
I think the Turks are prepared to stay in the effort to take out ISIL as long as it takes. I think there has been a gradual mind shift change in Turkey with the realization that ISIL is an existential threat to Turkey. They've demonstrated that in some of the actions they've taken inside of Turkey. And so I think, and there is a desire that is not newfound but more matured, that they want to continue to work with the United States and with the anti-ISIL coalition. That's why when they went into Sinjar, when they went into, there was air cover that we provided along with air cover from the Turks, but it did not involve American troops on the ground, but it did make it clear that safe haven for ISIL in Iraq and Syria was not something that the world was prepared to live with. It's used as a vehicle from which to plot not only terrorist attacks in those countries, but in Europe as well as in the United States. So there is a growing maturation of the recognition of what the problem is, who can be worked with within the coalitions that exist within Syria, but ultimately we all know it needs a political solution. And what we have all agreed on, all of those of us who are part of that coalition, is that the territorial integrity of Syria has to be maintained in whatever the solution is. But there is no clear solution yet as to how you transition out of Assad's leadership and regime into a government that is different and represents a coalition. We're a long way from that at this point. But we will continue to work very closely with Turkey, as we are with our European allies, our NATO allies, and the entire anti-ISIL coalition as it relates to taking back what they established, quote, stated as a caliphate. We are working very closely with the Iraqis and with our NATO allies to see to it that Mosul is recaptured and returned to Iraqi hands, out of the hands of ISIL, as well as Raqqa, which is sort of their headquarters in Syria. But this is a hard nut to crack, and it's going to take some time. Was there a third question?
If you think Guantanamo will be closed before you move on.
That is my hope and expectation.
Well, regarding time, Turkey, I cannot say, is it too long? Do they need more time? What we have said is very clear, though. We condemn the coup attempt. It was a very serious situation where they tried to destroy democracy, and that is never acceptable, of course. So in that regard, we fully see the serious situation for Turkey and the Turkish leadership. We understand that they need to act firmly also in a situation like that. Having said that, we also stated that we are a bit worried, though, that some of the actions can, all the layoffs or the people sent to prison, Turkey need to to stick to the rule of law, of course, and adhere to international law and human rights. That is important, because otherwise the coup attempt has succeeded in another way, and that is the Turkey being more a closed country. So we have expressed as friends that we are worried of some signals. The mentioning of once again using the death penalty, for example, is one of those signals that we said we are worried about. Having said that, also we are very clear, Turkey is an important partner for Sweden, for the European Union. We want that partnership to stay, we want it to develop, we think it's good for Turkey, it's good for Europe. And some say we should end the relationship with Turkey, and I said definitely not. We will try to develop that, because it's for the benefit of both parties, and we will stick to the joint action plan regarding refugees, and make sure that both partners actually can fulfill what we have promised. So that is our stand.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.